Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Marcus Rashford is one of 5 players Manchester United told didn't need to report for the start of pre-season, but he showed up anyway. So where does his future lie, and how difficult will it be for United to move on their unwanted stars? So here with us today, we have our Manchester football writer, Mark Critchley, and lead writer of the Athletic FC newsletter, Phil Hay as well. All right, listen to these names: Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Anthony, Alejandro Garnacho, and Tyrell Malacia were all told they didn't need to report back for the start of pre-season by Manchester United. Critch, how did that go down, firstly with the players, but also the people that look after the new players in the build-up to the new season?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that nobody could say they didn't see this coming. I think the direction of travel for all 5 of these players has been pretty clear for a while now. 4 of them, of course, were out on loan last season. So Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Anthony and Tyrell Malacia played absolutely no part of the past 6 months of Ruben Amorim's Manchester United. And so the writing was on the wall to an extent for those players. Garnacho is the only one who we saw playing regularly for Ruben Amorim last season. But as my colleague David Ornstein reported on The Athletic just after the Europa League final defeat, Amorim basically told him in a player meeting in front of the rest of the squad that you need to go and find a new club. So we've known that this would be the case for this group of players for a while now. The problem is that United have been unable to sell these players up until this point. And so it kind of came to a head last week where the rest of the squad was due back in training this Monday just gone, Monday the 7th of July. We knew that these players were out of favour, were on the fringes. The question was, are they going to be there? If they're going to be there, are they going to train on their own? And ultimately, are they going to be part of the pre-season schedule? Are they going to go on tour to America? And the rest of it with the rest of the squad. That has been the case at United. There's been these questions for several seasons now. I remember last season around Jadon Sancho as well. Even before that, Cristiano Ronaldo. So it's a repetitive theme that we've had with United over the last few years. And I think perhaps that played a part in the club actually on Friday coming forward and getting messaging out there to the effect that these players would be given this time away to help find them new clubs. Now, you asked, has that gone down well? How has it gone down with them and their representatives? Part of that messaging suggested that these players had asked to leave, that all of these players had effectively said that they wanted to explore a future away from United. Now, that is disputed depending on who you talk to, who you ask. I think some of the player camps involved would say that they would deny that they ever directly asked to leave the club. And they would have been quite happy to actually come in on Monday and start training with the rest of the squad, even though there's been this sense that, their future probably lies away from the club, that they would have been happy to come in and be part of training and train ready for the new season, if that even is at a different club and somewhere else. I guess the question is, what does it mean to ask to leave? If you're asking to leave, when are you asking to leave? Was Marcus Rashford asking to leave when he gave that interview to Henry Winter in December where he said that he's ready for a new challenge at the club? I think most of us read that and took that to mean that he was, laying the pathway for his exit from United. Equally, you can look at that and say that he wasn't directly asking to leave. Was Alejandro Garnacho asking to leave when he gave that interview after the Europa League final, and he was asked about his future and he said, I don't know, I'm going to go on holiday, we'll see what happens. And he was very non-committal after being quite critical of Ruben Amorim's decision to leave him on the bench in that game as well. So, it's all semantics. There's clearly differences of opinion here and there, but I think the key message to take away from the events of the past week is that these 5 players do not have a future at Manchester United under Ruben Amorim, and that is absolutely clear now.
Yeah, Phil, yet another head scratcher when it comes to Manchester United, but also I wonder how this also puts a bit of a dent in the kind of business they're looking to do. Obviously, Amorim's come in. He wants a new team. He wants his people there, but you've got this dead stock that you just can't shift.
Yeah, the semantics thing that Critch mentioned there is funny. I remember interviewing a player years back about a transfer request that he put in at a different club to Leeds, who I was covering at the time. And he said to me, it wasn't a transfer request, it was a perceived transfer request. And I said to him, well, what's the difference? And he said, well, I can't really explain, but basically they thought it was a transfer request, I thought it was something else. So you do get kind of caught in the middle. And when it comes to how you deal with players who you want to sell, I don't think there's a right answer to what you should do or a one-size-fits-all model. Critch summed this up pretty neatly there. When you're dealing with players who are surplus, it's kind of horses for courses, depending in part on who you're talking about. I mean, some players have no politics around them. They can kind of be on the fringes without being a great issue or any mad complexity. I mean, as an example, Sean Longstaff looks like he's about to exit Newcastle, but he's not somebody who Newcastle need to ostracise in the meantime. He's a pretty positive influence there, and he's not a real issue. I would say from a distance that Ruben Amorim clearly looks at certain Manchester United players, and I'd probably say Rashford in particular, as a bit of a malign influence, or to put it in a more diplomatic way, as people he'd rather not have around. And that's not especially unusual. I mean, I remember at Leeds, Marcelo Bielsa taking the job as head coach and deciding that anybody who was categorically out of his plans was going to train at a completely different time to the rest of the squad to prevent any interaction. And further down the line, he actually had players training off-site, at a different location altogether for the same reason. And his rationale was, I'm never going to use these players, I can tell you that now. So what purpose does it serve having them around? And the answer to that is not very much. But at the same time, it's surely easier to sell players if they're fit and in shape, and to be fit and in shape, they have to train. And the thing about ostracising them in the way that United have is that it makes it perfectly clear that you're very anxious to sell. And I know, as Mark said there, that's been telegraphed for a while, but it's kind of blindingly obvious now, and it is almost inviting clubs to come in and lowball you with the offers that they're going to make. And given that none of these players have left so far, it would be going some to say that United have handled this really effectively to this point. But I can totally see why Amorim has taken the stance that he has taken, because a coach like him has to have the authority to draw some red lines somewhere.
It's interesting what you're talking about lowballing there, Phil, because Critch, Ollie Case written a piece about the sort of mess that Manchester United have got themselves in this scenario. You'd have expected with a new season ahead, hopefully they'd have resolved some of the issues around here. But, teams lowballing them, you can see the values of players like Sancho, Ante, Rashford completely plummeting. And it's not that you're going to get market value for them, are you?
No, it's not. I think Phil hit the nail on the head there in terms of the bargaining position that United have is absolutely damaged by this move. Because yes, we've known that these players we're on the way out for a while, but it makes it absolutely clear that there's no road back for them. If there's always that possibility, then there's a sense that, okay, well, maybe they'll be on the bench at the first game of the season. Maybe Amorim will work it in. Maybe there'll be an injury crisis. This really draws a clear line in the sand, and I think that is the difference of the position. In terms of United selling, I mean, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago where I actually tried to judge whether or not United fans should be panicking at this moment about the fact that they haven't sold these players. And I went back through the last 11 or 12 years of United transfers, and the only time that I could find that they'd sold a player this early in the window, which was about late June at the time, was Alexander Butner going to Dynamo Moscow for 4.4 million in 2014. And
that's amazing.
Yes. Well, when I found that, my point in mentioning that in the piece was that it's early days, so don't panic. Historically, United haven't actually done many deals at this time, so there's still plenty of time for them to do them. When chatting to people who read that piece and the interactions and the comments on it, I think what people took from that was actually that, wait, United are absolutely terrible at selling players. And that is that is actually true at the same time. To be fair, it's completely right. United have been bad at selling players. If you compare them to the likes of Chelsea, if you compare them to Manchester City, clubs like that, who have these academy systems that produce talent, sell them on for a fee, they've never been at that level. I think if you look over the last 5 years, those two clubs have something like £500 million of profit that they've managed to make through selling those players. United, by comparison, is about 100 million. That's a huge difference. And the other big difference, I think, that sort of makes my Alexander Butner comparison irrelevant is that this summer is very different for United from summers past. Everybody's come into this summer knowing that they need to sell. if they want to reinvest further in the squad beyond Matheus Cunha, who's obviously through the door already, and then Brian Mbeumo, who is this interminable transfer saga that's been going on for months and months and months now. It feels like, it's actually just weeks, but it feels like months. If they want to do business beyond that point, they are very likely going to have to sell. That has been the consistent message coming out this summer. Part of me still wonders whether there might be some jiggery pokery they can do. They've got a credit card. They could maybe throw some money on that. I would never rule anything out with United. But if they want to stop spending beyond their means, which is why the reason that they're in this mess in the first place, they need to sell players.
Yeah, Phil, in Ollie's piece, he also points out how at their peak value, Rashford, Antony and Sancho were worth 250 million, according to Transfer Market, that is. Now, a combined value of 97 million pounds. I mean, that's a huge plummet. I mean, what does that tell us, you reckon?
Well, this isn't a news flash, and it's not a trade secret, but it tells us that United's judgment in the transfer market and in terms of squad building has been pretty dreadful for quite a while now. I mean, I would dispute whether they were ever really worth £250 million. That might have been the price that was paid, but there is definitely a difference. And I think in the case of Antony and Jadon Sancho in particular, they were pretty horribly overpriced, both of them. I also think that the wage given to Rashford, which is massive, doesn't tally with his current standing in the game. It might have done previously, but not now. And it's not as if it's simply gone wrong for him on Amarim's watch either. I think the scrutiny on Rashford and the feeling that he might need a fresh start away from Old Trafford, that he didn't look entirely happy, that the body language wasn't right, that all began much earlier. And it does feel like damage limitation now. I mean, Critch is spot on. For years and years, you never thought Manchester United as a selling club. That wasn't what they did. And you didn't feel that they were a club who had to fund one window by piling players out the door. But it's come to a crunch this summer, and PSR is obviously leaning on them extremely heavily. And they have very little option. And that's why I think the comparison to 2014, and Mark said this, needs to sort of reflect the fact that this is a summer like no other they've ever had, when they are under huge amounts of pressure to get money in. But they're definitely not going to recoup Antony's fee. They're not going to recoup Sancho's either. It's pretty hard to see how anybody out there is going to pay Rashford's salary in full because it's so big. Garnacho's slightly different. I mean, he should make them, if they sell him and they sell him at a good price, he makes them a useful profit, which helps with PSR. But again, we're not talking, say, Florian Wirtz by Leverkusen, where Leverkusen were selling from a position of absolute strength. United want Garnacho gone. Everybody can see it. That changes things, and it does change the way that other clubs will approach them with offers.
Yeah, Garnacho aside, Critch, players like Rashford, Sancho, even Antony. I mean, Phil talks about wages. Yeah, okay, we might want to buy him, but can the club afford those insane wages? I mean, Betis had just been quoted saying that, the £105,000 a week that Antony was on, it's very hard to match that for a club at their level, even though he had an amazing sort of season with them.
Yeah, look, we could take them one by one if you want. I think Marcus Rashford, for starters, one of the club's highest earners, probably talking one of the highest paid players in the Premier League. You say there's not a lot of clubs that can pay that salary. I absolutely agree. There's also not a lot of clubs who can pay that salary, who look at it and want to, right? I think that is the issue here.
Is it value? Yeah.
Is it value for the level of performance that Marcus Rashford has been putting in over the last few years? Now, he had people came away from the loan spell at Aston Villa like impressed, I would say, and that he was playing some of his better football in the last few years. He still wasn't quite regularly always getting in that team at the same time, right? And Villa had the option to take it up £40 million. I think there was a bit on both sides there. Both knew that it was a bit of a holding move in view of something further coming down the line in the summer. But we're now at the summer, and there's a very shallow pool of suitors that could possibly, meet Marcus Rashford's wage demands and would be willing to pay it. It's, maybe Barcelona are paddling in that pool. I don't know. We don't know yet. Even then, it sounds like something more like a loan rather than something that's permanent. Sancho, I think, it's almost the same situation, but amplified. Again, very, very high wages, but over the last few years, what performances have you really seen to be able to justify that? His salary has been an obstacle to him departing previous summers, whether it's on loan with Borussia Dortmund or with Chelsea last year as well.
Can I just ask, Critch, with Chelsea and Sancho, did they fundamentally want to sign him but not take on his wage, or did they actually just not really want him? And it was a nice little way of getting out of that one.
Well, I think so. The thing with the Sancho deal was that it was an obligation to buy, and it's the first obligation to buy that's ever not been an obligation to buy. So it is quite a curious deal. I think the understanding on that is that essentially it was an obligation to buy on the condition that Chelsea were able to agree terms with Sancho, and there has been talk of an offer going in. I don't think it was an offer that Sancho was going to accept. Clearly, it wasn't in the end. Were Chelsea doing that because they perhaps actually just didn't want to sign the player, and it was perhaps just a bit of a sop or a peace offering, or just to make it seem like, look, we couldn't do this? I don't know. I don't have the information on that. I would be purely speculating to say that. But clearly, there was a way out of that deal that a lot of us didn't foresee, and Chelsea managed to find it. I don't think if they genuinely wanted Jadon Sancho. Sorry, I think if they had genuinely wanted Jadon Sancho, I think they could have made it happen. Look, they seem to make it happen for the other 64 players who are on their books, so they try to sign in any given summer, right? So clearly that was possible, but I don't think the willingness was there from Chelsea.
Matheus Cunha has taken the number 10 shirt at Manchester United, and a confirmation that perhaps there is no way back for Marcus Rashford under Ruben Amorim, do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I'm going to answer this question in the same way that I answered the question at the top, in that I think it's been clear for a while and shouldn't really come as a surprise that there is not a place for Marcus Rashford at Ruben Amorim's Manchester United. We've seen this for a while. But and even with the number 10, right? Again, not so much of a surprise. When Cunha came in, people saw what number is he going to have? Well, the number 10 is probably going to be vacant at some point, and he's probably going to take that. But it didn't even take that long. I think that was the surprising thing about the announcement on Friday. Rashford is still a United player. He's been stripped of this number before the club really needed to do it, before they secured a move away from him. So in that sense, it was a surprise. And now he just doesn't have a squad number, and Sancho doesn't either, by the way. That is quite it's quite a sorry tale. It's quite a sorry fall from this academy graduate who has meant so much to a club that has a proud history of developing young players. But like I say, it's been absolutely clear since December when he was dropped for that City game. Garnacho was dropped for that game too. He was reinstated. Rashford wasn't. Then he gave that interview saying that he was ready for a different challenge elsewhere. He was left out of the squad consistently after that, only included when United were down to the absolute bare bones, and Amorim basically had to pick him. That was a game against Newcastle. I don't know if you remember. They were 2-0 down inside 20 minutes, and even then there was absolutely no hope of Rashford coming on to change this game. I think that spoke more than anything about exactly where Rashford was. And yeah, like I said, he went on loan to Villa. But I think this was always more of a, you go away, improve, play your football. We found a solution for you very late in the January window, but it wasn't as though he's going to go away, come back and be a rejuvenated character and be somebody who's a key part of the team going forwards. It was always just a device to be able to get him to play football before they reviewed it again in the summer. And so, look, I don't think anybody realistically watched Rashford play for Villa and thought he's going to come back to Manchester United and be leading the line next season. It was never really a realistic prospect. And yeah, in that sense, the stripping of the number 10 too, it just isn't that much of a surprise.
Yeah, the Rashford one really hurts me, Phil, just on a personal level, because, no one likes to see a footballer with so much potential be in such a sorry state when it comes to a team as big as Manchester United. But, I mean, it's been really sad to watch this one unravel, because this was a player who was hailed as the future of Manchester United. This was a player that was also hailed as one of the futures of the England national team. And look where we are right now.
It feels quite a long time ago that now, though, doesn't it? It seems as if a lot of time's gone by in between. I mean, just to quickly go back to obligations, Critch played the Sancho card. I'm just going to raise him with Jean-Kevin Augustin, 40 to 50 million pounds for a player you never actually signed is quite an achievement. But Rashford, the three problems with Rashford, really. One is that he, as we've said, earns a huge amount of money, which clubs either can't afford or just don't want to burden themselves with. I'm not saying everybody, but there'll be, a choice few out there who would consider him. Two, his recent sample of form going back quite a long way isn't brilliant. It's a long time since we were talking about him being on a hot streak at Old Trafford. And three, his relationship with Amorim is clearly not in a good place, which means that United can't even really be pragmatic about him. They can't say, listen, if we find a taker, he'll go, but if not, we'll reintegrate him, we'll find a way to use him, and we'll make the best of it. It's just not what Amorim wants. So it is complicated and it is messy, and I feel like money's the bottom line here, because it surely makes sense to the club and to Rashford now for him to move on in some form. But getting him out the door will come down to how they structure a deal, which lets him depart, because he won't be inclined to give up what he's supposed to be paid, which was fair enough. And imagine as well, he'd probably be fairly picky about the sort of club he wants to join if we're talking a longer term move. And when it comes to it, there just isn't a huge Rashford market out there.
Yeah, on Rashford, let's hear from Juan Mata. Critch, you recently caught up with him and asked him for his take on Rashford's position at Manchester United. Here's what he had to say.
I saw when he came through, I saw his first training with us. I love him as a kid, I called him the Wonder Kid. And the way he played, it was fearless. The way he played, you could feel he could win a game by himself at any time when he was playing at his best. So, of course, as a Man United fan, and as a Marcus friend, I wish that he can succeed here, because it's his club, his boyhood club. He loves the club, and I think it will be a very, very good stage in his career. I don't know what's going to happen, but if he stays and he can actually be happy and enjoy, I think it will be a win-win situation for both the club and him, and I hope that's the ideal scenario for me.
Yeah, Juan Mata definitely a bit more optimistic than we've been about the Marcus Rashford situation, Critch. But, I mean, you look at it and, as I said earlier, it's something that's quite sad for me, but I also think there's so much has passed in terms of that relationship with Manchester United. There really doesn't feel like any other resolution but for him to find a new club of some sort.
Absolutely. Just in Juan's defence, he was speaking before Friday's news, which I think must.
All right,
I'm not even sure he's that optimistic anymore that Marcus Rashford will be playing for Manchester United again. Certainly in the room with Amorim. But no, you're right. I think there is a sadness to it. It shouldn't really end this way. As I said, it's a club that has a huge tradition of players being developed through the academy and going on to make hundreds of appearances and win a lot of trophies. You think of just in my lifetime, Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs, players like that, but obviously the legacy of the Busby Babes as well. Marcus Rashford was always seen as part of that legacy. He was always seen as somebody who would fulfill it for a new generation. And I think even on Friday when the news came out, there was people at United were making a point of that. Even though clearly his time at the club is coming to an end, he's going to be a significant part of this period of the club's history, right? He's played a significant part in that. He's always going to be one of the most successful players to come through the academy in terms of appearances, in terms of goals. And he'll be remembered that way. I think it's 138 goals that he scored now, and he's 15th in the all-time ranks of United's top scorers. So his legacy in that respect will always be there. But I think you explained it perfectly there in terms of his. There's no United fans that are really up in arms about this. There's no demand for United and Rashford to get around the table and sort it out and just commit his future and find a way for him to get back into the team. There hasn't been for a while, to be honest. And even though there is this sadness about, United fans would say one of their own, ultimately looking like he's going to depart the club, I think what is more telling is that despite that, there is this acceptance on both sides, on all sides really, from everybody surrounding the club, that something has to change and that a parting of the ways is necessary. And I think that speaks more to what's gone wrong really for Rashford over the last few years, rather than this, what is an undoubted legacy of being, an academy player and part of United's recent history.
Where did it go, Phil? We've reported on the deal sheet, Paul Balouse was saying, Barcelona are interested, and we said, who knows if they can afford it. But do you see him playing for another Premier League team, or does it feel like a move abroad, really?
It'd be quite a ton of events for Rashford to parachute into one of the best teams in Europe, Barcelona. But you know what? At this stage, it probably makes most sense. Barcelona have lost out on Nico Williams. I mean, that was a total bombshell last week. I honestly can't remember or I can't think of many times when the entire sport has been completely wrong-footed like that. I mean, it felt like a move to Barca was a fait accompli for Nico Williams. Everybody thought that was happening, but it's not happening. So they need to move on, and they still do need somebody in that area, in that sort of position. Liverpool don't seem to be budging on Luis Diaz at all. I wondered whether they were just, again, trying to hardball in that one. But given that they're not moving in the slightest, you feel as if they will actually go through with what they're saying and keep Diaz next season. So in those circumstances, and considering that Barca have spoken about Rashford openly as well, it's got to be a possibility. That said, I can't see United rushing to do massive favours for Barcelona financially, and every single transfer that Barca try to do seems to get caught up in this mad tangle of salary caps and financial levers and the general sort of organisational dysfunction that exists over there. So I wouldn't have it down as a simple negotiation, but it does look like an option. Would he play for another Premier League club? I'm pretty sure he would if he got the right offer. But again, where does he fit at the moment?
That's it. Good point. Quick one on Garnacho, Critch. Amidst social media posts and falling out with Amorim, I mean, he probably represents out of that bunch the best prospect for a sale for Manchester United. You can't imagine they'll be commanding a crazy strong fee for him, but probably the strongest off that lot if they were to sell him.
Yeah, I think so. I think it helps that compared to some of the other players, he's on relatively more modest wages, so that would make him more attractive in terms of the fee to potential suitors. I think my colleague Laurie Whitwell's been reporting United were looking around £70 million. I think there's been some pushback from United as well on that. Clearly, you don't want to go into a negotiation just saying this is the price, because if you feel like you could get a bit more and United need to get as much as they can. I remember talking to people connected to United last summer about Garnacho when he was in a very different period of his United career, and they were rating him as a 80, 90 million pound prospect. I think United would struggle to get that in this current market, certainly. But I think he didn't have the best of seasons, but I think you watch him, he's exciting to watch. He gets fans off the seats. He's direct. He's somebody he's still 20 years old. If you look at his numbers last season, he got 11 goals, 10 assists. Now, if you were telling me that there was a 20-year-old kid available on the market for that price, then you'd surely be looking at him and he'd surely be of interest. And, if I was to get on my soapbox for a minute, I think of all these players, Garnacho is the one that you have a little bit of a reticence about actually letting go. And you wonder whether United are maybe going to regret this further down the line. But clearly, as with Rashford, as with the other three as well, a line has been drawn in the sand about by Ruben Amorim here. There's a question of his authority, which potentially has been questioned in that interview by Garnacho that he gave after the Europa League final. There's been the social media post that you referenced as well. I think, as with Rashford, there's not a lot of United fans who would be up in arms about him leaving the club and would say, no, we absolutely need to keep him. I think there's a general fatigue, if you like, with Garnacho's some of the off-field stuff. So, yeah, I think he's, of all these players, you're absolutely right. He's the one that United could get the most of the market for. There's a long-standing interest from Chelsea. I think we've been reporting as well that Garnacho probably would like to stay in the Premier League, and London is something that appeals to him. There's not been anything really concrete in that link so far yet, though. No real developments on it. So we'll see how it goes. But I think, yes, you're right, that Garnacho is maybe their best prospect of a decent fee at least.
I don't know whether Critch would agree with this, but there's always that little niggle in my head about whether Garnacho is all that. He's good to watch. And
you don't think you've seen enough, Phil?
Well, he certainly has something about him, but there are times where I can't tell if he's a bit of a luxury player. And I always think a good way of gauging this is to ask yourself how many of the top tier teams in Europe, the best of the best who are in the running for the Champions League and everything else, would want Garnacho. And I kind of feel like they would rather put the money elsewhere, which is not to say that he isn't worth a good fee and he doesn't have plenty of potential. But I can never decide where I think he ranks.
I kind of flip that, just play devil's advocate. I think that I take the point completely. I think it's worth remembering that he's 20 years old at the same time, and sometimes that is forgotten because he has been part of United's first team maybe for the last 3 seasons now, and somebody who's made an impact. So there's that slight perception that he's been around a bit longer than he has, but and that he's older than he is. But also, I take the point about what top team would have him. I think if you're at United in your position, and if I came to you and said, there's a 20-year-old kid on the market who scored 10 goals, 10 Premier League goals, 11 assists, or whatever last in all competitions, I think that was, who got that return last season, he's available at 50 to 60 million pounds. Are you interested? They would say yes, because there's clearly a player there to work with who can be, maybe he does need whipping into shape a little bit off the field or in terms of his social media posts, but it's not a huge problem as much as a lack of talent is. And I think when you watch Garnacho, there's potential there. It is still just potential at the moment, and you've seen bits of ability, but there is potential there. And I feel like a club in United's position, again, you're talking about elite clubs. United, let's face it, they finished 15th last season. The budgets that they're working with at the minute aren't that great. They need to be finding young players who can sustain the club for the medium to long-term future and have that ceiling, if you like, that's a little bit higher than the rest of the current squad. I feel like Garnacho, you only have to watch United play with Garnacho in the side. He's the most threatening player in terms of, he's the one that takes the most shots. He's the one on the end of the most chances. Now, he doesn't put them all away, and that is a huge, his decision-making at times is horrific, let's be honest, put not too strong a word on it, but he's 20 years old. Those things can get better. I do think that there's a player in there, and I just wonder if United are going to regret letting him go ultimately.
Yeah, I dare I say I'm sort of on the crit side on this one, because I think about the money Mikhailo Modric went to Chelsea for, and Arsenal were in for that deal as well. Let's not forget Garnacho probably offers you a little bit more certainty, especially in the Premier League anyway. All right, let's move on, because next we've discussed the players Manchester United are trying to sell. What about the players they might want to bring in? Yeah, Critch, in the deal sheet on The Athletic on Tuesday, we reported on Manchester United's interest in Moise Kean from Fiorentina. Last season we spoke about his prolific season in Serie A after leaving Juventus. I've looked on the socials. There's a lot of Manchester United fans worried that this is where their club's at if they're going for a player like Moise Kean. But what else can you tell us about some more of the players, especially in that attacking position, that Manchester United might be in for?
Well, if some people don't like Moise Kean, I've got bad news about some of the rest of the names that they've been linked with. But, no. Look, I think there needs to be a recognition of the position that United are in right now. Okay,
totally, 100%.
This isn't. They aren't going to be able to go out and just throw money at the problems. And Moise Kean is somebody that they've been keeping tabs on. 19 goals in Serie A last season, a very different player now from the one who I remember being at the game when he was subbed on but then subbed off at Old Trafford when he was playing for Everton back in 2019. A colleague, Conor O'Neill's, wrote a piece about that, which just goes to how much he's changed since then. He will be at Old Trafford, I think, because they're playing Fiorentina in a friendly in August, so he is going to turn up at some point.
You can take a look at what potentially might be the future.
Yeah, but yeah, so he's got a €52 million release clause. I think the deadline for that is next Tuesday. Look, given everything that we've spoken about on this podcast so far, given the priority that United are putting towards Bryan Mbeumo, I think the chances of them triggering that are unlikely. But United are, while they're very much focused on Mbeumo, they are canvassing opinion. They are speaking to clubs, speaking to agents. They're looking at players in different positions and seeing what deals can be done. We've already reported on The Athletic before about my colleague Larry Whitwell got the line about Aston Villa's Ollie Watkins and the conversations that have been had around there. There's been contact with Eintracht Frankfurt about Hugo Ekitike. And yeah, I think that when United feel that they are ready to move, when they are able to move, then they'll be ready to move. That's the position that they want to be in. I think the question is when that will be. I think that is why you're also seeing at the same time links with some, Premier League proven, certainly, slightly older strikers who are on the free agent market. So the likes of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Jamie Vardy, Callum Wilson, these are players that we were reporting in the deal sheet have been offered to United. So it's quite different from them having an active interest in pursuing these players, but they've been offered. They're there. In a couple of cases, they have questionable injury records. But I guess if United were getting to come to a position later in the window where they've not been able to get players off the books, where there is still a very present, clear need for a centre forward, as there has been even before this window, then maybe those options come on the table.
Yeah, we were just joking about it there, Phil, but isn't this a reality check in many respects, from the old Manchester United to where we see them now? I mean, look where they finished last season in the Premier League. Also, European football's a big thing for any top player. Isn't that literally where we see this team right now? Not to say they won't get back to glory, but especially in the market right now, top players want to be playing in Europe. They want to be playing in the Champions League.
Oh, very much so. There's no getting around that. And Critch is right. They have to be realistic, Manchester United, about where they are in the food chain at the moment, and therefore the players they can realistically go after, the players they can afford. I mean, Moise Kean is not by any stretch the best striker out there, but he's had a very, very tidy spell with Fiorentina and has definitely improved since going there. So not somebody you could say outright isn't good enough for Old Trafford. I mean, they've got Cunha done, so all good on that front. He's a really talented player, Cunha. I'm not sure that on his own he enhances United massively, but that's a good deal to get done quickly. And Mbeumo feels like a bit of a red flag to me, because that is absolutely there to get over the line, so much so that Mbeumo is basically begging United to sign him from Brentford. But the incremental offers are falling short, and now that we've got to the point of pre-season and the start of the Premier League season is coming, you're getting close to the point where you'd credibly be able to say that United are just biding their time and playing the long game with this. This is one which, if they're going to do it, they're going to have to get on with. It feels like money is an issue, which, if you've read any of Critch's coverage or any of Man United coverage in general, it would be, wouldn't it? Money's a massive issue at Old Trafford, and they do need to get a bit of a shifty on now with players going out and players coming in, because it's Arsenal on the first weekend of the season, and honestly, the last thing Amorim needs is a pasting on day one. He got away with some really dreadful league form last season, but I don't think the same level of understanding will be there in the 12 months ahead. And I don't know. There's always been this question right from the point where they bought in about whether Ineos, the minority shareholder there, but the people who are effectively running the show, can play as good a game as they talk. And I feel like this window is crucial for their reputation. Get it wrong, and there's going to be some heavy firing coming.
Critch, Moise Kean and Mbeumo, obviously Cunha, attacking positions seem really imperative for Manchester United, considering actually they're letting go of a lot of attacking talent, or potentially letting go of a lot of attacking talent. Why is it so big for them? Like, what in your opinion, why is that a big focus for them this time around? Because you've still got Højlund, let's not forget, there's a striker there, and Xerxes.
Well, United scored 44 goals in the Premier League last season. That was the fewest that they've managed since, post 1992, essentially, of the Premier League era. And you mentioned Højlund and Xerxes. I think the two of them, they signed for a combined, there's more than 100 million over the last two summers. They contributed 7 of those 44 goals. So, look, I don't think it's solely down to a striker issue. I think you could look at United as well last season and say there was problems of actually creating chances at the same time. So much of that responsibility often falls to Bruno Fernandes, that if he isn't firing, and there isn't that much else in the team, and there's a lack of that at the same time. So that is another issue that they have. But look, you could look at the business that they've done this summer in Cunha and say that they've got 15 goals there that he scored for Wolves last season. If they get Mbeumo as well, he scored 20. I think 5 of them were penalties, and I don't think he's going to take penalties off Bruno. So maybe you've got to massage those numbers down slightly. And it's rarely as easy as picking up goals here and just dropping them there. I think there is a huge question about how this all fits together at the minute, because fans are desperate from Mbeumo to sign. It's been weeks now where there's, as Phil says, there's been this incremental progress, or it's not really felt like progress because we've still not really got anywhere with it. If he signs, maybe that puts a bit more positive spin on the window, but I still come back to the sense that 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, when we were talking about what United need to do this summer, we were saying that they need a recognised number 9. That is a clear and obvious need that they must address, and to be honest, that we expected them to address. And we know that they were in the battle for Liam Delap, right? And that was a player that they wanted to bring in. That was a clear priority. He chose Chelsea. They shifted to Mbeumo. Part of me is looking into the future, 3 or 4 months time from now. It's October, November, things aren't going well. or any optimism that people had generated during the summer through the transfer business has gone. And we're looking back and we're asking, well, why didn't they sign a striker? Why, what's going on there? Everybody knew they needed one and they didn't do it. And so I think that is still the one glaring aspect of business that needs to be done. Even if Bumo gets done, United's lack of goals was a huge problem for them last season, essentially, and one that really at the minute you're still struggling to say that they've actually fixed.
All right, gents, let's leave it there. Critch, Phil, thanks so much for your time, and also really nice to hear from Juan Mata as well. And also, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave us a cheeky comment as well. That's it from us. We're back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.